One of the hardest parts for me about starting a new hobby is the materials that I need to get started, because on the one hand you have things that are super cheap but also they function so poorly that they completely turn you off of the hobby, and on the other side you have things that are super expensive and really only there for people who are really far ahead in their journey and maybe are even doing it professionally. And then there's just like, what are things that I definitely need off the bat, what are things that I don't need off the bat, and it can be really overwhelming, especially when it comes to modding. I'm your cool Uncle Marissa, and a few of you have asked for this video, so here I am today with a toolbox tour. Now, while a lot of you have not asked specifically for a toolbox tour, you have asked me a lot for recommendations and like shopping lists, but I feel like those are not ideal because, as you will see, I have a lot of different things that are for different levels of what exactly you're doing. For example, I will show you the 3 soldering irons I've gone through in my time modding. And then there are things that are like nice to have, but you really don't need them when you're starting out. And there's a lot of things that I have not actively like bought from a shopping list, so to speak. You know, they just found their way to me. And I think that's something definitely to be very conscious of when getting into a new hobby. For example, if you're getting into knitting, you don't need every single color under the sun. You know, you just need to kind of think, okay, well, what do I want to make? I want to make a green sweater with pink buttons. Okay, so you get green wool and you get pink buttons. Otherwise, it's very overwhelming. It's a money sink. And for a lot of us, especially where we are in the economy, that is not something ideal. I will do my best to explain how I acquired everything and where I got it from. And I will list out things in the description, but please don't just like look at the description and be like, therefore I need to buy all of these things. Like actually watch the video, and not everything will be something that I'm able to notate, but I will do my best. Anyway, without any further ado, let's take a look at what tools your cool uncle uses for modding. Okay, so this is a soldering mat, and it is very helpful. First off, it's heat resistant, and otherwise it has some parts that are magnetic. For example, here, you can tell which parts are magnetic because on the back you can see the magnets, and that's really great for holding on to your parts as you work. I usually will put my like screwdrivers and tweezers and stuff up here. These little guys are really easy to use for micro soldering, and they have numbers in them, so you can correlate each bin to, for example, either a step or your bill of materials, whatever works easiest for you. In terms of cleaning it, usually I just run over it with isopropyl alcohol, and then I will blast it with the shower head. And the hardest part to clean is these. That's because you got to get in there with a Q-tip if you get solder paste or something in there. But yeah, these are very helpful. I would suggest getting one that's sort of as big as your desk is, just so that you have as much room as you need. But before we get into the toolbox, something that is not in my toolbox but is essential to everything I do is, of course, my soldering iron. So the iron is a Pinecil. These are USB-C powered. They're considered like portable soldering irons because, yeah, they're really tiny. They're very comfortable to hold, and their interchangeable tips are very accessible, and there is quite a variety. I haven't had any issues with it. And this is a stand that I believe one of my nerd fuse got for me for my birthday from my wish list. It's been a huge help because instead of balancing my iron against like random stuff and then having it fall and burn me or just make me get up and have to pick it up off the ground, I can just sit it in here. It also comes with the steel wool for cleaning your tip right here, which I don't know if you can see it in the video, but bits of it are kind of well overdue for just replacing the whole thing. On the topic of soldering irons, my previous soldering iron was this guy, which is the Miniware TS100. It is incredibly similar to the Pinecil in terms of what I use it for. It's virtually indistinguishable. So why did I move from this to this? Well, this guy, don't let the USB-C, or no, the micro USB, is that a micro USB? Yeah, don't let that normal connector fool you. That's just for data transfer for things like firmware updates. The actual power is from this barrel connector, which would ideally be fine if you found the right power supply for it. However, I went through many power supplies, both ones that were specifically recommended as well as ones that just matched the specs, and I have a very loose barrel connector. It just the jack would just pop out while I was working. I'd grab my soldering iron and suddenly it was cold. It was incredibly frustrating, and I tried tightening it using this screw right here, but to no avail. So I was like, everyone goes on about the Pinecil, so might as well try that. Just a note on the Pinecil, by the way, you will find Pinecil on like AliExpress. Don't buy it because the ones on AliExpress are knockoffs. That is what the creators of the Pinecil say. With that in mind, it's very likely that you'll find a lot of knockoffs on Amazon as well. I ended up buying directly from their website. In terms of the Miniware, the TS100, they did release a sequel to this one, the TS, I think 101, which is also USB-C powered. So with my experience with this, I would say you can't go wrong with that either. So whichever is more accessible for you. I did find this while I was looking for that one, and this was my very first soldering iron. It's a Hakko soldering iron. I got it from iFixit. I thought this was like the way to go because it is wireless. It just takes a crap ton of batteries, and the battery life is kind of woeful. 4 AA batteries. I don't really recommend it with the options that we do have around. I don't remember how much this was. I imagine it was very cheap. The tip, for example, also is like really thick, the tip that comes with it. And yeah, I don't recommend it, but this is what your young uncle was using. And now we can move on to the actual toolbox. So if your toolbox is not adorable like this, then your soldering journey is gonna be not very good. You are required by law to have a cute toolbox. I actually was so obsessed with this line. I got like everything I could from it. Also, I organized the inside of the toolbox to show you guys. And the sound it made when I tilted it made me think that maybe it was in vain. Anyway, not everything fits in here, but let's take a look at the stuff that I consider like the most necessary to be accessible. Okay, it seems like everything just clumped together, that's all. All right, you guys have definitely seen these screwdrivers before. This is a Triwing and this is a Phillips, and they're kind of all you need for a lot of handheld consoles, so I like to keep them within reach. I got these with a purchase. I don't remember from where. I always think it was Extreme Rate, but it might have been somewhere else, and I very much recommend them. It's kind of like one of those things that you don't buy, you just happen upon, but they make such a big difference. I have a variety of spudgers. These came, I think, with various things as well. I didn't buy them. This orange one has kind of lived past its heyday, so it's kind of the trashiest one of them all. These two are in pretty good condition and they are the same style, so I use them pretty interchangeably. These are good for, taking things out where maybe your nail doesn't fit, or like me, you don't have very long nails and there's no heat involved. So for example, these can be helpful for lifting ribbon cables, for slotting things in on a PCB. Yeah, as long as there's no heat. They're also good for opening up enclosures that are pressure fit or they've been clipped together, or if there's any sort of additional tension after you unscrew the screws. You can use these to run through the seams and lift things up, and they won't damage your material due to being plastic. I keep a guitar pick in there for the same reason. You'll have seen probably there are guitar pick shaped spudgers out there, and so I just use this when those are necessary. It is thicker, so I don't use it as much as I use the long ones, but you know, I've got a ton. So, and this guy has been through a lot. This is from Elite Obsolete Electronics. It came for free when I upgraded the storage and battery on my iPod. You can buy a ton of these, I think, from AliExpress for really cheap. These are good for when there is heat involved because it's metal, so it's not going to melt. And they can be good for example, helping you lift something. If, you know, you need to get something, for example, under a Game Boy power switch while you desolder it. If you're not using a hot plate or hot air from the back and you're using a soldering iron, you can sort of shimmy this in under and it'll help you keep it up while you desolder the other side. Since larger things, obviously, if you're using one soldering iron, you can't get it all in one go. And it's also helpful as occupying the same purpose as the plastic ones, but if the material that you are needing a spudger for is something that would be strong enough to damage the plastic ones. I have two of these out so that in case one of them gets dirty while I use it, I don't have to address that in the moment. These are fiberglass pens. These are really good for refreshing contacts. For example, going back to the power switch thing, if you have gunk on your power switch and you clean it up with isopropyl alcohol and then rub it with a fiberglass pen and then clean up any residue with a Q-tip and isopropyl alcohol again, that is a big help. They can also help with certain degrees of corrosion. You can clean off some corrosion sometimes with it. Any sort of maybe carbon buildup or anything like that. It's basically, they are a way to scratch something, but gently. They can also be used to expose solder mask. If for some reason maybe you want to solder something to a via, which is, you know, the little dots that you see on your board, and you need just more surface area, this can do that. They're very helpful, but primarily I use them for cleaning. I have a variety of tweezers. This isn't even all of them. These are ceramic tweezers, so they are heat resistant, but also unlike metal tweezers, they won't get stuck to things like solder. So that's really great. The unfortunate side of these is they do chip very easily if you use them inappropriately. And I haven't used these in a while because I use them inappropriately, and you might be able to tell that one side is chipped. You can buy replacement tips for these, which is really cool. Yeah, ceramic tweezers are very cool. These are the ones that I use more often. I think these came with my hot air gun. I tend to use the straight tweezers. I was using them for a long time to apply solder paste because I didn't clean my tube properly, so I needed a different applicator. But I typically use these to keep things in place, either with one prong or both. I know you've seen it already, but I'm like, come on, focus, focus, focus. It's so hard to focus with like such a busy background. There we go. Makeup YouTuber tips. But yeah, I mainly use these to hold things in place just by like, boop. And these ones are primarily used to place components because with the curved tips, it's nice because you can kind of see what you're doing while you pick it up. With a straight tip, it's sort of the top is in the way, so you don't see what you're doing. So whenever I'm doing any sort of micro soldering, I use these tweezers. These ones I don't use as much anymore since I got a PCB holder, but these are pretty cool. They their natural state is closed, unlike regular tweezers whose natural state is open. So this way, if you need to hold something in place, you can just use this. I can't think of any examples right now. I've used it before to hold small PCBs in place. I've used it to hold wires while I tin the tips, for example. You can also use it to hold two things together and then like do what you need to. Yeah, but I don't use them as much anymore. I have these 2 rolls of solder wick. Solder wick is if you need to remove solder, you can place it on top of the excess solder and apply your iron. Make sure like it's fluxed up and it should pull out the solder, and then you should be able to lift it up and you can just cut it and continue using it. This is Chipquik. Chipquik is a leading brand in solder things, and this one's pretty wide. This one people were raving about. It's called Wick. I think it's a Japanese brand, and it is apparently like imbued with flux, which makes it more effective. I don't know if I've necessarily felt it be more effective, but I've also used it in very high flux situations already, so I don't think the addition of flux in the wick is going to do anything when your entire board is like soaked in flux. But yeah, this one is thinner, so this one I like to use for cleaning up fine pitch things like ribbon cable connectors, CPU pins, that sort of stuff. Speaking of flux, this is my Flux Pen. It's a Chipquik pen. It's no clean flux, which means that while it's good practice to clean up after yourself with isopropyl alcohol, if you don't, it should be okay. They do come with spare tips, which you very much need, because look at this poor guy. Rough. But yeah, it's just full of liquid flux. This evaporates very quickly due to the nature of it, and obviously you can't use a lot of it in one go. This was super helpful to me when I first started out, and like the extent of soldering I was doing was soldering a wire onto enable touch controls for an IPS display. And the reason that's helpful is you don't make a mess. By the time you've applied it, that's the only thing you're going to do, so it's not going to evaporate unless, I don't know, you go drink a coffee in the meantime. And I still use it for any sort of quick touch-ups or, you know, little things that I need to do. And then we have this poor guy. These are flush cutters, and I have used them to cut everything. I use them to trim my wick. I use them to cut wires. I use them to cut plastic. So they are not very sharp anymore. They're kind of just the trash it around flush cutters. And I think I also got these at the beginning of my soldering journey too, many years ago from iFixit. But because sometimes I do actually need to make precise cuts in things, I got these. They are God hand clippers. They are kind of, I think, aimed at Gundam hobbyists. And the reason I got these is because they're the best in the market. And you can tell they're the best on the market because there's a little frogman on them. I keep these in the packaging so that the blades don't get dull. I also have a ton of random screws right here, which I don't know what to do with. I don't know who they belong to, but that's where they live now. Okay, level 2. Oh, all right, let's go to the next level. I have 3 colors of 30 gauge wire. 30 gauge is typically what I use for most wiring jobs on handhelds. The only time I've used thicker is, I think I use like 24 or something, which, yeah, the number goes down and gets thicker, so weird. But I use that on my BMO build because I wanted the wires to like look really juicy. You would also use larger wires on larger things, like if you're RGB modding your TV, you would need larger wires. But for handhelds, 30 is good, and 3 colors on hand is enough to differentiate between wires if I need to have multiple. I keep my thicker wire somewhere completely different that we're not going to worry about today. So this is my Engineer brand solder sucker, and this is pretty expensive in comparison to a lot of the stuff I've shown you. But you know, we hear a lot that art supplies don't make the artist, and while that's true, I think sometimes bad supplies can discourage someone. For example, I actually hated tripods for the longest time because my friend gave me his old tripod and it was so absolutely janky. It was such a pain to set up. It wouldn't stand up right. I was like, I don't want a tripod. And it wasn't until I bought like a moderately priced tripod that I was like, oh no, tripod is good actually. And it was kind of similar with the solder sucker. I had a plastic one from iFixit and it really didn't do anything. So I didn't use it. And so I upgraded to this and my life has improved so much. Ask your doctor about engineer solder sucker. So what are these for? This is for sucking up solder. It generally helps with anything that is through hole because it just pulls the solder out. If you've ever tried to wick solder when something is a through hole component, you've noticed that sometimes you'll just be wicking forever and you are more likely to damage the board before you get all the solder out. And so if you're not using a solder sucker, sometimes it's even better just to heat up the entire area with solder and just pull the component out and then wick the holes, which are empty. This kind of thing is also indispensable if you're a mechanical keyboard hobbyist because, yeah, those switches are all through hole components. So if you ever need to desolder them, this will make very quick work of it. They do sell like electric ones though too. Those seem very scary and very overkill. I don't have experience with them. This is a recent acquisition. I don't feel like I should need to show this to you guys, but it's in the toolbox, so I'm like, okay, I guess I have to. It's just like a beveled edge knife, and this I got so that, for example, when I trim a Gameboy shell, you tend to trim the ledge that's on the front side where the display sits, and this side is just sharp, so I don't really use this side. But yeah, you tend to trim that and then you need to really file it down. And so I have files and obviously flush cutters and stuff, but this can also just help you get much closer. Of course, you know, it's gonna take a while to get a hang of because you don't want to lose your grip or something and scratch up your shell. That would be worse. These are the different soldering iron tips that I've acquired. These work with both the Pinecil and the Miniware. I think this conical tip came default with the Pinecil. They're fine, but they're not like the best. One thing I did like about the TS100 is it came with this hoof tip. And the hoof tip is really nice for spreading a lot of heat at once. This can be very helpful in a lot of situations when you're soldering larger components. I believe I got this on the recommendation of Natalie the Nerd because she was saying it's the best tip to solder vias with, which makes sense because, you know, it's very pointy, very concentrated heat, and it can really just get in there. I know some people like these for pins as well, like CPU pins. And this one I think I bought by accident. It's like a flathead type tip. I was trying to buy a knife tip and I think I misunderstood the listing and I bought this. I don't use this, it's not really good for anything. And the tip that is on my iron right now is the knife tip. This thing is great because, you know, it's wide, so we get a lot of heat, but also because of the knife, it is very good for things like fine pitched pins, getting into little corners. I tend to at most swap between this and the hoof tip. I should probably swap over to the J tip sometimes. There are definitely situations where I think the J tip would have been better than the knife tip, but like you can pretty much achieve what you need to with this. So if I were to give a suggestion on what tips to have in your kit, I would say a knife tip and a hoof tip. And the last thing I have is this tin that is currently empty, but I try to keep Q-tips and toothpicks in here because they can both be very helpful. Toothpicks for doing things like, you know, helping you place things or helping you place, what do you call it? Solder paste in more delicate areas, and Q-tips mainly for cleaning up. All right, now to the bottom container. We have solder. Cool. This is the iFixit brand. So this has lasted me literally forever since I started soldering. And I think I started soldering like 4 years ago. So this is still going strong. It's good. It's leaded. It sounds dangerous, but buy leaded solder. Unleaded solder is not very good. I have these battery packs with alligator clips. This is AAA, this is AA. These are for mainly testing Gameboys, so that, you know, it's just to give them power. These are wire strippers. These are also another thing that it's like incredibly helpful, and you will feel so much relief when you finally acquire a pair. When I first started out, I was stripping wires with my flush cutters, and that often would result in the wire just breaking, and you just had to be really precise, and it was just very frustrating. With wire strippers, you just put it in the correct gauge hole, and then you grip it and you pull the wire and it's stripped, and it's so much easier, so much cleaner. I got these recently, I think from Adafruit. I haven't used them yet, and honestly the only reason they're in the toolbox is because they're so small, because usually when I'm using my toolbox I'm not using anything that would require such large screws, but I really like that they're 90-degree angles. 90-degree angles? They have achieved 90 degrees from Harvard, Stanford, and other Ivy Leagues. But I am sure they're going to come in handy. But I don't think this is something like you need to have in your toolkit. It's just cool that they exist. Some other long things is these dental picks. It's in a pack of 3, but I'm gonna be honest with you, I only use one. I only use this one. And what I use it for is to check the legs on IC chips, any sort of fine pitch pins. You can use it to just kind of gently go over the legs to make sure that they are soldered on. It's very helpful. I think this tip I picked up from one of Voltar's videos. And these you can get from like anywhere, very affordable. You could probably ask your dentist for some, but he might not, or she might not, be very willing to part with theirs. I have these wipes. I thought I was so clever. I bought like a bajillion of these off AliExpress. They're just the wipes that come with your electronics. There's a wet one and a dry one. However, all of the wet ones have now become dry as well. So yeah, just a bunch of dry wipes. Whatever. Can't hurt. I have a glasses screwdriver kit here. Why? Who knows? Okay, more tweezers, more problems. So these ones are rubber tweezers. So they're kind of like, you know, they're good for things that metal tweezers and ceramic tweezers might be too hard for. My ideal use for these, for example, is to close the ribbon cable connector, because, you know, you have to put pressure on both sides. And so I will, you know, maybe grip one side with the tweezers and one side with my right hand fingers. But unfortunately, these also, like the ceramic ones, even more so, are very prone to breaking. I don't know if you can tell, but the tips have snapped. They're still usable, just not like on anything that requires precision. So I do need to replace these tips. And I think this is the last one. These are the files I mentioned earlier. They're really good for many purposes. I use this flat one a lot. I tend to use this to file after trimming things. Usually, again, that trim for IPS displays if you are trimming an OEM shell. Another one I use every so often is this one that's perfectly round. This is great for holes. If you need to widen a hole or just clean up a hole. I also like this one, which is like a square, a cube, like it has 4 sides. I use it for the same thing that I use the flat one for. Well, no, not the same thing, because I also use the flat one kind of as a chisel. But I mean, like, in terms of the side, this is good for if you need something flat and you need to cover less surface area, because as you can see, it's thinner. Okay, that's it. That's the toolbox. So we're gonna just hop out of the toolbox and show you some other stuff. So we have Flux in paste form, and we have solder paste, shockingly also in paste form. The reason I don't keep these in with the toolbox is because A, they take up a lot more space for what they are. I don't need to use them all the time. These are the kinds of things that, like, if I'm using these, it's because I'm sitting down for a really long project. So I don't really need to have them on hand all the time. These are both chip quick. This is no clean flux as well, but unlike the pen form, if you do not clean, it's incredibly noticeable and sticky that you have not cleaned. Solder paste, this is new, which is why it's so clean, and I'm going to make sure to clean it properly after I use it so that I don't have to use tweezers as an application tool again. I had a really big tube before and it went bad, and I unfortunately had to use bad solder paste because I didn't realize it went bad. So this time I was more conservative and I got a smaller tube. But the Flux, it lasts longer. This is electric tape. Yeah, I don't really use it, to be honest, but I don't know why I brought it out. Yes, electric tape is safe to use in electrical applications. Speaking of tape, Kapton Tape, which is actually always in my toolbox, and I'm gonna put it back in there, but I had it at my desk. Kapton Tape is very good for covering things in need of insulation. So, for example, we tend to cover the pins of the Game Boy card slot because those touch the back of the IPS display usually, and the metal on metal can cause interference with each other. So you would cover the pins with Kapton Tape and it'll provide a layer of protection. You can also use Kapton Tape to hold things in place or to protect them. For example, I usually cover any soldered wire points with Kapton Tape because it'll just hold them down a little more so they won't pop off if any sort of tension is placed that is unintended or just normal while opening or closing. It is also helpful to use on places that you don't want to get solder on. So for example, let's say you're working on something where you have tactile switches. Tactile switches are very vulnerable to falling apart if you get flux in them. Even isopropyl alcohol in a certain amount can cause them to fall apart. So covering them up and making sure the rest of the board is clean, and then you can lift it up. This actually, I steal it from my washi tape collection, and I need to get a dedicated one. But this is so helpful because you can just pull the tape and you get a straight cut. There's also tape dispensers for Kapton Tape, so I think that might even be a better option if you have the room to keep one out. This bowl I grabbed at Micro Center, and it's very helpful. It's just a magnetic dish. Any sort of thing where you are using screws, this can be very helpful to collect them. If you are earlier in your career and you're still getting acquainted with what screws go where, one thing that I used to do was I took an old ice cube tray and I would number the like each ice hole, and I would write down on a piece of paper, like, number 1 were the 6 back screws, and I would put the 6 screws in that hole. There is a different word for it, I'm blanking. But yes, so I do recommend that if you don't know where the screws are going, but otherwise, if you just need things to keep in an area, this is it. This coin is from when I needed to take the Game Boy player off the GameCube. This screwdriver is incredibly useless for day-to-day activities. It came with my Super Note. It is so cute, so cute. So it just hangs out here. And this is the flippy drive disk drive cover, which I'm scared to throw away for some reason, but I don't need it. All right, now I'm gonna move on to some bigger appliance type things that I use, and all of these are kind of optional, especially if you're early on in your journey, but this one is not. This is, if you can believe it, not a cat hair extractor, contrary to what it may look like, but a fume extractor. And this is incredibly important because solder fumes are dangerous, and I soldered for a really long time without one of these. Big thank you to my friend Julia, who got me this for my birthday, I think last year. Yeah, especially when you start using a lot of flux, the smell of flux is just absolutely awful, very headache inducing, and this is absolutely a life changer because I can do bigger soldering projects using a lot of flux, and I have this going and I'm not bothered by the fumes. I barely notice them. You just need to, especially if you get a small one like this, you just need to keep it really close to what you're working on because it doesn't have like a huge distance. Okay, moving on. This is a microscope with an LCD display. I don't know why people keep asking me for microscope recommendations, and it's like, girl, literally my microscope's brand, it says microscope and like a knockoff Microsoft font. Anything is fine. Any microscope footage you've seen in my videos are from this. It has an SD card slot, micro SD card, and so you can see that they're not like gorgeous, but you can see what you're doing. It has a light, it has like menu options, and this is the focus dial. So I think in terms of microscopes, I think it's important, especially for diagnosing if you are doing more complicated things, so that you can actually see your work. It's also good for your eyes in the long term because I think straining your eyes on teeny tiny things is not ideal. The only thing that I did notice is someone had told me that their microscope was really, really short. So I guess one thing to keep in mind is just make sure that the maximum height of your microscope is tall enough to allow whatever you need to go under it. So for example, for me, that would generally be the hot plate and or the PCB holder that would be adding that height. So that's just one thing to look at. Otherwise, I think you can get microscopes for as low as like $50. Speaking of PCB holder, this was absolutely one of my splurges. This is the OmniFix tool, and you've got these like magnetic little holder guys, and they can hold your PCB in place, they can hold wires in place. If you remember, I think in my Gotcha SP video and also my GameCube controller video, I had to use them to hold like the board in place from the main board so that I could wire them more easily. They're also very neat because, you know, you can like put them upside down on the little magnets, and the magnets are very strong, so that can help you get different angles, and the ball joint too helps you get different angles. So yes, these are like just tall enough for my hot plate. But this was very expensive. I bought it for myself for my birthday. because I was like, yeah, I want to get this. It's really nice. And it was a bit of like a splurge. So I think it would be a neat thing to ask someone maybe to get you as a gift. But otherwise, there are cheaper alternatives out there. I can't recommend any because I haven't used them. But just pay attention to the height it can get your PCB to and what the necessity that you have in your life is. For example, if you don't have a hot plate, but you can find something that holds it like a little bit high, just holds onto it so it's steady for not a lot of money, then yeah, why not? If you do have a hot plate and you need this to hold it over the hot plate, then yeah, you might need something taller, etc., etc. This I completely forgot about, but it was under the PCB holder I just showed you. This is like one of those just interchangeable screwdriver kits. I bought this before I was even into modding because I just needed one. I think I've had this for maybe like 8 years or something now. This one is kind of a Frankenstein game bit. So I took like one of the concave bits for the screwdriver and stuck this in, and then I can put this in here, and look at that. I've got something that can reach the depths of the GameCube's screws, because those things are so deep. But yeah, other than this, I don't usually use this a lot unless I have something with weird screws, because generally I'm just going to be using the 2 little screwdrivers that I showed you guys. But I do have this on hand out in the open because it has like such a variety. For example, it has like hex Allens. It has a variety of flatheads, and flatheads especially are helpful for stripped screws as well. But yeah, it has served me well. I've been tempted by the iFixit ones, but it's like, there's nothing wrong with this. This is probably my bulkiest thing, which is my hot air gun. This is, you can see, the Yihua 959D. And I think that there is a lot of these that are just clones of each other, and they're all around like the $60 range. So I would just look at reviews and buy smart. You can control the airflow, the temperature, and you can put 3 presets. I don't use the presets because, I don't know, it's just easier to do what I want. Hot air and hot plate work really well in conjunction with each other. However, if you want to choose one over the other and it comes down to economical value, I would say hot air is cheaper. One thing that turns people off of hot air a lot is they're like, oh, it blows my components away. But I think that's just people not mitigating the temperature and airflow very well. I think a lot of people will put it the same temperature that they have their soldering iron at, so maybe like 300 Celsius, and then turn up the air really high. And so obviously then you're going to blow everything away. I tend to have mine airflow around 3-4 and around 400 Celsius, maybe a little higher. And that way, you don't have all this air crazy blowing everything away. And another thing that helps is I got angled tips for my hot air gun. And this is the one I have on just constantly, even though it came in a multi-pack. It's thin, so it's a lot more focused. So, if you are trying to heat one component specifically, you are able to do so without blowing away any of the components in the tri-state area. And also because it's angled, kind of like the tweezers, you can see what you're doing. By the way, never just heat one component. You generally want to heat the entire board, but you can use a lower temperature and just, keep your distance more before you focus. It's just if you very suddenly heat something, it can break. It's the same reason they say you shouldn't drink something hot immediately after eating ice cream. The way I like to use hot air is essentially for anything that's not an IC component. or fine pitch pin component, or a component that will be damaged if you hit it with hot air from above. So for example, tactile switches or plastic FFC connectors. I like that it gives me more control, and I can take it away very easily by just moving my hand. For example, with a hot plate, if I want to take something away, I have to move the actual PCB, and it's hot, so you can burn yourself. So you're not able to have as quick of a response. And again, if you want to be economical and just buy a hot air gun, any of the things that you shouldn't hit head on, you can instead hit from behind the board. That with a creative combination of using a soldering iron should be good for most applications. And speaking of hot plate, this is my hot plate. This is the Miniware MHP30. It's the smaller version. They have a bigger version as well, but I felt like I didn't need that. One of my nerd fuse got this for me for Christmas, so that was really wonderful. These hot plates are quite pricey, which is why I say if you only get one, a hot air gun might be more economical and flexible. Usually I keep this at around like $220 to maybe $300 if it's crazy. But when you're working with solder paste, they come with a little data sheet thingy that tells you, so you know, this is SMD291AX, and it tells you the reflow profile, and you can see that like the peak is 235. So that can help you gauge what to set this at when you are using solder paste. This little guy is also USB-C powered and programmable to have presets. I actually do use the presets on this. I think I have a 100, 220, and 250. The reason I have a 100 is one of the most invaluable tips I was given was that you can use a hot plate to start to heat your board while you use hot air. And it really makes the process so much easier if you do happen to have both. It's kind of what I was saying about, you know, you should heat the board before you focus on a component. It kind of is a bit of a shortcut for that. I think that's it. I have other knickknacks, obviously, but this is generally what I use on a consistent basis for mods. So I hope this was helpful with a lot of the questions that you guys have had. And yeah, back to me. We are back. And, you know, my biggest regret is not being able to shrink myself to do like an actual toolbox tour and walk around the toolbox. I hope that was helpful. I hope that answered any questions you might have about what specific tools I use. I hope it was something that maybe put your mind at ease, that you don't necessarily need to have certain brands of certain things. You know, it's a bit like if I'm telling you to how to make cereal, it doesn't really matter if you get 2% milk or fat-free milk. It's kind of your preference. Brand doesn't matter always. Like, you know, you can get the Horizon carton milk or you can get your store brand milk. It's just needs to do the job, which is making you cereal. As there is no shopping list and this is not some sort of incognito affiliate marketing scam, if this helped you at all, please consider donating to my Ko-fi. Anything really helps a lot, again, in this economy, and it's all put towards making videos, even if that just means keeping me fed, which I do my best, but it's easy to forget. Let me know in the comments if there's anything that you use in your toolkit that maybe I'm missing and you're like, you know what, you would actually get a lot out of this. Let me know if there's anything that I showed that was helpful and you're thinking of adding to your toolkit. And otherwise, thank you so much for being here. Big thank you to my Ko-fi supporters, one-time supporters, monthly donations, even people who just buy stuff from my Ko-fi. You guys really, really help this channel keep going. So a huge thank you. And as always, don't forget that you are always welcome at Cool Uncle's house. And I'll see you in the next one. Bye.